In the summer of 1873, in the rolling grasslands of what is now South Dakota, two worlds existed side by side, without ever truly touching. The world of the white settler, with his fences and his cattle, and his belief that the land was his to shape. And the world of the Sioux, ancient and vast and deep-rooted as the rivers that carved the valleys between the hills. These worlds rarely spoke to each other in the language of kindness, but occasionally, rarely, beautifully, against every odd the frontier could throw at a human heart, they spoke in the language of love. This is one of those stories. This is the story of Jake Calloway, a quiet, sun-browned cowboy from Texas who rode north looking for work and found something he never expected to need. And of Winona Many Horses, the youngest daughter of Chief Red Bear of the Hunkpapa Sioux, who had never once in her 20 years of life been surprised by any man. Until Jake. Pull up a chair. Let me tell you how it happened. Jake Calloway had been riding for 11 days straight when his horse finally refused to take another step. He could not blame the animal. He had pushed them both hard across the Nebraska flats and up into the Dakota territory on a vague tip from a rancher in Kearney who said a cattle outfit near the Black Hills was paying good wages for experienced hands. Jake had no other plan and no other place to be, which made the vague tip as good as a written invitation. But now, at the edge of a shallow creek lined with cottonwood trees and tall buffalo grass, his horse stood with legs trembling and head low, and Jake understood that the next stop was here, whether he wanted it or not. He dismounted slowly, his joints protesting after days in the saddle. He was 31 years old, though the Dakota sun would age him fast enough that strangers often guessed higher. He was not a large man, but he was solid, the kind of solid that comes from years of hard physical labor rather than any particular attempt at strength. His face was angular and quiet, with eyes the color of pale river water, and a mouth that was quick to go straight and slow to smile. He led his horse to drink, and then knelt beside the creek himself, scooping water into his face and breathing in the cold, clean smell of the prairie morning. The sky above him was enormous and pale gold. Somewhere distant, a meadowlark was calling. He heard her before he saw her. Not footsteps. She moved too quietly for that. What he heard was the sound of water being disturbed differently than his own movements disturbed it, a slight ripple and shift upstream that his years in wild country had taught him to notice. He turned slowly, without alarm, the way a man turns when he is too tired to be frightened and experienced enough to know that alarm without information is just wasted energy. She was perhaps 30 yards upstream, standing knee-deep in the creek with a clay vessel raised above the water, watching him. She wore a hide dress decorated with quillwork along the yoke, and her hair was dark and long, pulled back loosely. She looked young, far younger than he expected, but her posture was not young at all. She stood with her feet planted and her chin slightly elevated, watching him with the calm appraisal of someone who has never once in her life been in a situation she could not handle. Jake raised one hand, palm out, in the universal gesture of peaceful intention. He had encountered enough different peoples in his travels to know that the gesture read clearly across languages. She did not raise her hand in return. She simply watched him for a long moment, then lowered her vessel into the creek and filled it with a deliberate unhurriedness that told him clearly that she was not afraid of him. He respected that immediately. He was not a man who found comfort in being feared. "Morning," he said, because the silence felt like it needed something in it, and he did not know the Sioux words for greeting. She turned and walked back toward the grass with her full vessel, never hurrying, never looking back. Jake watched the cottonwood leaves move in the place where she had been and tried to understand why he felt, suddenly and without reason, that he was not as tired as he had been. Jake found the cattle outfit 2 days later and hired on at wages that were acceptable, if not remarkable. The spread was owned by a man named Eli Draker, who had pushed north from Kansas 5 years prior and established a working ranch on the edge of treaty land, with the kind of confident disregard for legal complexity that characterized many men of his era and ambition. Draker's range bordered on the hunting territory of Chief Red Bear's band of Hunkpapa Sioux, a proximity that made some of the hands nervous and made Draker loudly dismissive of their nervousness. He had a paper signed by someone in a government office far away, and he believed the paper meant more than the people already living on the land it described. Jake said nothing about this. He had enough experience with men like Draker to know that argument was wasted, and enough instinct about situations to know that this particular arrangement had the specific tension of something that would eventually require careful navigation. He kept his opinions to himself and learned the land. That was his habit, learning the land first, before anything else. The creek routes and the water sources, the places where the grass thinned and the ground turned soft, the paths worn by cattle and the different paths worn by other travelers, narrower and older and moving with a different logic. He followed those older paths with his eyes, not his horse, and began to understand the rhythm of the land before the creek. He saw her again on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after his arrival. He had ridden the north fence line at first light, checking for breaks, and found a section where a post had worked loose in the soft soil near a dry wash. He was digging the post back in, working steadily in the early heat, when he became aware of being watched. He did not look up immediately. He finished the stroke he was making with the post-hole digger, then straightened and turned, and she was there, 20 feet away, sitting on a painted pony and watching him with the same calm attention she had given him at the creek. He recognized her instantly, the posture, the composed evaluation in her eyes. "Morning," he said again, using the same word as before because it had not worked particularly well the last time, but it was the only greeting he had. She said something in her own language, several words, delivered in a tone that was not unfriendly, but was very direct. "I'm sorry," Jake said. "I don't speak Lakota." She looked at the fence post he had been repairing, then at him, then at the fence post again. Then she said, in English so precise it surprised him, "You are fixing the wrong post." Jake looked at the post. Then he looked at the section of fence on either side of it. Then he followed the line of the fence with his eyes, until he saw, 50 yards down, a section that was distinctly leaning inward, and had clearly been that way longer. "You know this fence line," he said. "I know this land," she replied. "The fence arrived recently. The land I have known since I was born." Jake pulled his post-hole digger out of the ground and looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I'd be grateful if you'd show me which post is the real problem." She considered this for a moment with the same evaluating calm she had shown him at the creek. Then she turned her pony and rode down the fence line, not fast, not slow, at exactly the pace that told him he should follow if he wished, and she did not particularly require that he do so. He followed. They rode down to the leaning post in silence. She stopped her pony and looked at the post, and Jake dismounted and examined it and found immediately that it was rotted through at the base and that the surrounding 6 posts were all compromised in similar ways. "This whole section needs replacing," he said, more to himself than to her. "Yes," she agreed. "It has needed replacing since the spring floods. But the man who owns this fence does not ride his own line." There was something in the way she said it. No judgment, just observation, the way you observe weather, that Jake found quietly devastating in its accuracy. "He does not," Jake agreed. "But I do now." He looked up at her, and she was looking at him, and in the morning light her eyes were very dark and very direct, and something in Jake's chest did something that he did not immediately have a word for. He noted it the way he noted things that required more information before he could understand them, with a quiet and specific attention, and let it rest. "What is your name?" he asked. A pause. Then, "Winona Many Horses. Jake Calloway," he said, "from Texas." "I know Texas is far south," she said. "Why are you here?" "Looking for work," he said. "Found it." She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "You are not like the other man. Draker?" "He does not see the land," she said. "You see it." She turned her pony and rode back the way she had come, unhurried as always. And Jake stood by the rotted fence post and watched her until the grass swallowed her, and there was nothing left but the wind and the meadowlark and the enormous sky. He stood there longer than he needed to. They did not arrange to meet again. It simply happened, the way things happen in a land where there are more wide-open miles than people to fill them, and where two people whose paths cross are rare enough that the crossing matters. Jake rode that north fence line every morning now, not because Draker asked him to, but because he had taken it as his responsibility in the way he took all responsibilities, quietly, completely, without asking for acknowledgement. And Winona, he came to understand, traveled that land because it was her family's land, and had been for generations, and the fence across it was a recent intrusion that had not yet altered her habits of movement. The third time they crossed paths, he had brought coffee. He had no particular plan. He simply had 2 cups because he had made too much at camp, and the waste bothered him, and when he saw her sitting at the edge of the creek watching the water, he dismounted and walked over and held out a cup. She looked at the cup, then at him. Then she took it. They sat on a broad, flat rock and drank coffee, and watched the creek run and said very little, and Jake found that the silence was not uncomfortable the way silence with strangers usually is. It had a quality, like the silence of early morning before the world wakes, or the silence between thunder and rain, that felt full rather than empty. After a long time, Winona said, "You do not talk much." "No," Jake agreed. "Most men who ride for the one who owns the fence talk constantly," she said, "especially when they are nervous." "You are not nervous." "Not particularly," Jake said. "Should I be?" She looked at him. "Many of my people think white cowboys should be very nervous about where they put their fences," she said. And then, unexpectedly, the corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. "But you are fixing the fence. That is different from building new ones." "There's a difference," Jake agreed. "Yes," she said. "There is." They sat a while longer. The sun moved. The creek ran. Jake refilled her cup from his canteen, and she accepted it without comment, which he took as a good sign. "Your English is very good," he said. "My grandmother spoke it," she said. "She taught me." She said a language is a door. I should have as many doors as possible. Smart woman. "The smartest I have known," Winona said, with a simplicity that made it clear this was not sentimentality, but fact. "She is gone now. 2 winters. I'm sorry," Jake said. She accepted the condolence with a small nod. "She would have talked to you," she said. She was not afraid of strangers, but you are. A pause. "I am careful," she said finally. "That is not the same as afraid." "No," Jake said. "It is not." He stood to leave, because he had fence line to finish, and because staying longer felt like asking for more than had been offered. But before he mounted, he turned back and said, "Same time tomorrow, if you happen to be this way." She looked at him without expression. "I go where I go," she said. "I know," Jake said. "So do I." She was at the Rock the next morning, and the morning after that. Chief Red Bear was not a man who missed things. He had led his band through 20 years of changes that would have broken a lesser man. The shrinking of the territory, the encroachment of settlers, the shifting promises of men in far cities who had never seen the land they so casually legislated. He had fought when fighting was necessary, and negotiated when negotiation was wiser, and he had kept his people fed and intact and alive through conditions that had destroyed other bands. He did this through intelligence, patience, and an absolute clarity about human nature. When his youngest daughter began returning from her morning water gathering with a settled, careful look about her that he recognized as the look of a person who has found something worth thinking about, he noted it. When she began taking longer than usual on the north end of the territory, he noted that too. When one of the young men reported seeing his daughter sharing coffee with a white cowboy on the flat rock by the creek, Red Bear sat with this information for a full day before he did anything with it. Then he sent his second son to invite the cowboy to camp. Jake received the invitation on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a young man who spoke excellent English and radiated the specific wariness of someone who has been told to be polite and is working at it. Jake said he would come the following morning. He did not sleep well that night, but he was not afraid. He was thinking. He arrived at the camp at sunrise, left his horse at the edge, and walked in carrying nothing but himself and his hat in his hand. He was met by the second son, who led him to a teepee larger than the others, and then left him at the entrance. Red Bear was seated inside, in the composed stillness of a man who has all the time in the world and intends to use it wisely. He was perhaps 60 years old, with a face that had been shaped by weather and thought in equal measure. His eyes were very dark and very still, and when they moved to Jake, they moved with the settled attention of a man who has spent a lifetime reading other men. Jake sat when indicated and held his hat and waited. "You are the one who fixes the fence," Red Bear said. His English was slower than Winona's, but deliberate and exact. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Not the one who owns the fence." "No, sir. I work for him." Red Bear considered this. "There is a difference," he said, "between a man who owns something and a man who works to keep it in order." "There generally is," Jake said. "You have spoken with my daughter many mornings." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Jake thought about the question honestly before answering. "Because she knows this land better than anyone I've met, and because the mornings are long, and she is interesting company." Red Bear was quiet for a moment. Then, "Interesting." "Yes, sir. You are careful with your words." "I try to be. My daughter is also careful with her words. She does not share company with men who are not worth her time." A pause. "She has spoken well of you." Jake said nothing. There was nothing he trusted himself to say to that would improve the situation. "What do you want from my daughter, cowboy?" The question was direct and deserved a direct answer. Jake met the old chief's gaze and said, "Nothing I haven't been invited to want. Just mornings by the creek and honest conversation. And I hope, whatever might grow from that, if she's willing, and it seems right." Red Bear looked at him for a very long time. Then he said, "My daughter makes her own choices. She has always been this way. I did not make her this way. She arrived in the world this way. I have found it is not worth fighting a river over which direction it goes." Jake felt something ease in his chest. "You will be honest with her," Red Bear said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir, I will. And if the man who owns the fence decides his fence should be somewhere different, you will not let her become a problem he solves with paper or with men." The question landed with its full weight, and Jake accepted it. "I will not," he said. "Whatever happens between Winona and me, she will not be made smaller by the choices of the man I work for. I can promise that." Red Bear was silent for a long moment. "The fence man," he said finally. "Does he know you are here?" "No, sir." "Good," said Red Bear. And then he offered Jake food, which in the Sioux tradition meant the conversation had moved from negotiation to something else entirely, and Jake ate and said little, and listened to everything, and when he finally left the camp an hour later, the second son walked him all the way to his horse, which Jake understood was an honor. He rode back to the ranch in the full morning light, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like a man with something worth protecting. 3 more weeks passed before Jake said the thing he had been carrying since the first morning at the creek. He had not been deliberately waiting. He was simply a man who did not speak until he was certain, and he was not certain until the morning Winona told him about her grandmother's belief that the world had a sacred web running through all living things, and that love was simply the moment when 2 threads of that web recognized each other. "Your grandmother," Jake said, "sounds like she understood something most people spend their whole lives missing." "She did," Winona said. "She said that most people look at love the way they look at weather, something that happens to them from outside. She said love is something that grows from inside and finds its way out." "She was right," Jake said. Winona looked at him, and there was something different in her look, a slight opening, a less guarded quality in the way her eyes rested on his face. "Jake," she said, "what do you want?" He had thought about how to answer this question for 3 weeks. He had thought about it in the early mornings before he rode out, and in the long evenings after supper when the other hands were playing cards. He had turned it over carefully, the way he turned over important things, looking at it from all angles, testing it for truth. "I want to know you better than I do," he said. "And I want whatever grows from that if it's honest on both sides. I'm not asking for what I don't have the right to ask for. I'm not making promises about things I can't promise." But I'm telling you what's true, which is that I think about you more than is strictly useful, and I look forward to these mornings more than anything else in my day. And those two facts together seem like something worth telling you." Winona was quiet for a long time. A long, long time. Then she said, "My people have many words for love. There is a word for the love of family, a word for the love of the land, a word for the love between warriors who fight side by side, and there is a word that is used only for the love that my grandmother described, the kind that surprises you." "What is that word?" she told him. He tried to repeat it, and she laughed. A real laugh. The first time he had heard her laugh, and it was the best sound he had heard in a very long time. And she corrected his pronunciation, and he tried again, and she laughed again, and said it was still wrong but closer, and for a long perfect moment they were just two people on a hillside at sunrise trying to say a word across the distance between their languages. "I think," Winona said, when the laughing had settled, "that you are someone I am willing to keep knowing." "That's enough for me," Jake said. For now, she agreed. And the way she said it, with the careful precision of a woman who means every word she chooses, suggested that the words, "for now," were simply the honest version of something larger. The prairie spread out around them in every direction, impossibly wide, impossibly bright. The world did not care about them, in the vast indifferent way of the world. But they cared about each other, and on that particular morning, in that particular light, that felt like more than enough. The trouble, when it came the way trouble always comes. Not announced, not dramatic, just suddenly present and demanding a decision. Draker had decided to push his fences east, into the strip of land between the river and the hills that Red Bear's people had used as winter grazing territory for generations. He had new papers from the land office and a crew of 4 men and the specific confidence of someone who has always won the arguments he has started because he has chosen arguments where the other side had no recourse. Jake found out on a Wednesday when he overheard the plan at supper. He did not sleep that night. He rode out before dawn and went to the place where Winona usually came to gather water, but she was not there. He waited until the sun was fully up, and then rode to the edge of the camp and asked for the second sun and sent a message, "Draker is coming east today," before noon. Then he rode back. He arrived at the disputed strip ahead of Draker's crew and was waiting there, sitting his horse in the middle of the line where the new fence posts were supposed to go, when Draker arrived with his men and his surveyor and his papers. "Move out of the way, Calloway," Draker said. "Can't do it," Jake said. "This is my land now. Government certified. It's their winter grazing," Jake said. "Has been for longer than your paper is old. You push into this strip, you're not going to have a labor problem. You're going to have a much larger problem. I'll take that risk." "The risk isn't only yours," Jake said. "There are families back at that camp, women and children. If your fence posts go in this ground today, the situation that follows is not something you can control with a paper." Behind Draker, Jake could see the Sioux men coming over the ridge at a walk, perhaps 15 horses, no weapons raised, but present in a way that was its own kind of statement. And at the front, next to Red Bear's second son, he could see Winona. She had positioned herself where he could see her. He did not know if she had done it intentionally or not, but he chose to believe she had. Draker saw the riders, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite fear, but the close cousin of it. "Calloway," he said, his voice lower now. "This is not your fight." "Maybe not," Jake said, "but it's where I am." He did not pull his weapon. He did not threaten. He simply sat his horse in the middle of the fence line and met Draker's eyes and waited. Draker looked at the riders on the ridge for a long time. He looked at his 4 men. He looked at the surveyor who had taken 3 steps backward. He looked at Jake. Then he said, "This conversation isn't finished, Calloway." "No," Jake agreed. "It isn't, but it's done for today." Draker turned and rode back toward the ranch. His men followed. The surveyor followed fastest. Jake turned his horse and looked up at the ridge, where Winona sat watching, still as a painted figure, the morning wind moving through her hair. He touched the brim of his hat. She held his gaze for a moment, Then she turned her pony and rode back over the ridge, and he watched until there was nothing left but the wide, clean sky and the sound of the grass moving, and something in his chest that was so large and so certain that he finally had the word for it. Jake Calloway resigned from Draker's outfit the following morning and wrote 3 letters before he rode out. One to a rancher in Wyoming who owed him a favor, one to a land agent in the Dakota Territory asking about homestead parcels near the river, and one to Red Bear, carried by a passing trader, asking formally and respectfully if a conversation about the future might be welcomed. Red Bear's answer came back in 5 days. It said, in the precise, careful English that Red Bear had worked hard to learn, "Come to camp for the evening meal on the next clear day. Bring nothing but yourself and your honesty, which you appear to have in sufficient supply." Jake rode to camp on a Tuesday evening in early September, when the sky was the particular blue that the Dakota Territory does only for a few weeks a year, and sat across the fire from Red Bear, and beside Winona, who said very little, but whose presence beside him felt more right than anything he had felt in a very long time. He did not propose that night. That would come later, in the proper way, with the proper respect for the traditions Winona had taught him in their mornings by the creek. He simply made clear that he was not going anywhere, and that he intended to build something permanent on this land that he had come to love, with the same surprise and certainty with which he had come to love the woman sitting beside him. Winona said, when they walked to the edge of the camp afterward and stood in the enormous quiet of the prairie night, "My grandmother's word, for the love that surprises you." "Yes," Jake said. "I think," she said slowly, "that I have found the right pronunciation." Jake looked at her. And Winona Many Horses, the chief's daughter, the careful one, the woman who had never once in her 20 years been surprised by any man, smiled at him with the full, specific warmth of someone who has found exactly what they were not looking for. "So have I," Jake Calloway said. And the prairie held them both, and the stars came out one by one, and the story of their love began in the way that the best stories begin. Not with drama or grand announcement, but with 2 people who had chosen each other quietly, honestly, and completely.